In 1865, in Tennessee, Edward Young and a group of soldiers face a horde of zombies that emerged at the end of the American Civil War. 6 years after the zombie apocalypse began, Edward lost his family. The man went out hunting for 2 days, and when he returned home, he found his wife infected. When he realized that the woman had become one of those monsters, Edward had no choice but to shoot her. However, his son disappeared, so the man decided to leave home to look for him, but he never managed to find Adam. Over time, Edward began to document what he was witnessing in a diary and concluded that the only way to eliminate a zombie is to destroy its brain. As these monsters move slowly, a long-range weapon is perfect for fighting them. After capturing his former neighbor, who has also been infected, Edward begins to do some experiments on him to find out exactly what senses those monsters have. As expected, Charles doesn't remember Edward and has no idea who he is, but he is still able to see, hear and smell. Those creatures seem to crave human flesh and have no desire for any other kind of food. Despite not being able to think, zombies are afraid of fire and flames can be used to drive them away. Motivated by his curiosity to know more and more about those monsters and the number of contaminated people who still exist, Edward gets on his horse and heads far away from home. On the way, he comes across several zombies and skeletons of people who have been completely devoured. After a few days on the road, Edward decides to take a break and approaches the edge of a lake to collect water. When he gets down, he is surprised by the attack of a zombie that was hiding in the water, and the creature manages to drag him in. Desperate, Edward tries to defend himself and concentrates on preventing the monster from biting him. After a few minutes fighting the creature, the man manages to eliminate it underwater and climbs back to the river bank. While he rests and tries to recover from his fright, Edward notices other zombies slowly approaching, and among them is Adam. When he sees his son again after all these years, Edward gets emotional, but begins to cry when he sees the sad end the boy has met. Immediately, the man grabs his gun and starts shooting at the other zombies, but he can't do the same to Adam, and the boy manages to catch up with him. At that moment, Edward holds his son to avoid being bitten and screams in despair as he destroys Adam's head with one shot. That night, the man sets up a bed made of dry branches and sets fire to the young man's body in a farewell ceremony. After the funeral, Edward keeps some of his son's ashes in a metal container and, that night, thinks about putting an end to all his suffering. After taking a few sips of his drink, he puts a bullet in his revolver and takes a shot, but gives up after the second attempt. As he leaves the house, the man comes across a zombie and takes out all his frustration on it, hitting it until it destroys him. In the morning, Edward sets fire to the cabin where he has spent the last few days and sets his last goal in life. Now, the only thing he intends to do before taking his last breath is to take his son's ashes to a waterfall that Adam had dreamed of visiting, but never had the chance to. After years of riding through the forest, Edward has become a completely insensitive person, capable of doing anything to survive. One day, during an attack, Shallow, his faithful squire, was bitten and the wound began to fester. As a result of the injury, the horse had lost the desire to ride and was suffering from pain. Even though he knew that the animal would be unable to continue his journey, Edward insisted on keeping him close, as Shallow was the only friend he had left. However, when he realizes that his horse is withering away more and more, the man decides to spare him the pain before he turns into a monster and, with tears in his eyes, says goodbye to his friend. Now that he has lost his only companion, Edward continues his journey alone, carrying within him a great rage. A few days later, the man finds an old village destroyed and, as he is weak and hungry, he decides to stop and look for food. Upon entering one of the houses, Edward finds the body of a man sitting in a chair and is suddenly attacked by his wife. The old woman suddenly appears and tries to bite the intruder, but is eliminated by Isaac. After helping the intruder get rid of the attack, Isaac points his gun at him and asks if Edward has been bitten. When he realizes that he hasn't been infected, the man lowers his gun and they both hide from the zombies that are approaching the house. As soon as the creatures leave, Isaac strikes Edward and he passes out. When he wakes up, the former soldier comes face to face with the guy who hit him and soon realizes that he is no threat. Instead of treating him as an enemy, Isaac shows interest in Edward's story and asks a few questions about his past. When he discovers that Edward fought in the war, Isaac asks for his help to rescue his sister, who has been taken by a general called Williams. This man leads a group of rebels who live hidden in a bunker, and Isaac claims to know all the tunnels where they live, as he helped build them years ago. As the general is always surrounded by a group of men as crazy as himself, Isaac needs help to get into the hideout. Since losing his wife and son, Edward no longer has a purpose in life or anything to fight for, so when he sees a man asking for his help to rescue a member of his family, he can't refuse. Together, The two friends became relentless in their fight against the zombies, and the monsters stood no chance against them. Even though he doesn't know if Isaac's sister is alive after being taken away for so long, Edward remains committed to the rescue mission and is willing to do everything in his power to bring the family back together. One night, while warming himself around a fire and telling stories of the past, Isaac says he needs to go out to do his business. While he is alone waiting for his friend to return, Edward is surprised by the sudden arrival of Wayne, who puts a gun to his head and steals his revolver. Then General Williams appears and strikes Edward to take him to his hideout in order to use him as a volunteer in his research. Knowing that he has no chance against those men, Isaac decides to remain hidden behind the bushes to go after Edward at dawn. That night, the man is taken to a cell full of prisoners and discovers that the general is purposely contaminating people to find out if any of them are immune to the pathogen. While in prison, Edward meets Emma and discovers that the woman has been there for a few weeks. All infected patients are evaluated by Dr. Johnson, and the doctor carries out countless tests to try and find a cure for the disease. However, even after months committed to this research, Johnson is unable to find a way to reverse the effects of the contamination, and Williams is furious. The general says that if in the next few days the doctor doesn't find a treatment to bring the infected people back, they will be fed to the monsters. The next day, when Emma was about to be taken away to be infected, Edward tried to convince the man to take him instead. Just then, Isaac appears and eliminates the guard. He then hugs his sister and leads all the prisoners out of the bunker. When he realizes that some prisoners are trying to escape, Wayne runs after them and manages to hit Edward with a shot. Just then, a zombie appears and the young man is devoured. Seeing his wounded friend, Isaac carries him in his arms until he reaches the house of a healer called Eve. The woman lives isolated in a cabin in the middle of the forest, and Emma knocks on the door begging for her help. When the young woman begins to believe that there is no one in the house, the door slowly opens so that she can enter. However, as soon as Emma enters the house, the door slams shut and she starts screaming for help. While Isaac tries to destroy the door to rescue his sister, Eve appears and recognizes the young woman, as they met for the first time when Emma was still a child. Just then, the door opens and Emma asks her brother to help her get Edward into the hut, as the healer has agreed to help him. When she notices that her patient is pale and in a cold sweat, Eve comes to the conclusion that he may not survive and gives him some medicine to ease his pain. The woman then disinfects the wound before removing the bullet, and Edward feels such severe pain that he faints. As he has lost a lot of blood, the man needs to rest, and Eve reveals that if the wound becomes infected, he will not survive. At dawn, Edward wakes up and the healer applies a remedy she has prepared herself to the wound of her patient, who thanks her for her kindness. At that moment, Eve becomes emotional, because according to her, no one has thanked her for many years. The woman is happy to be useful again and takes Isaac and his sister to see the traps she has created to catch the zombies. The woman reveals that the few who are able to get past the traps end up ringing the bells that hang outside the hut, so Eve can tell when they're coming. Even after healing, Edward and his allies decide to stay on that hill with the healer for some time, until they finally decide where to go. Now that the survivors have decided to come together as a single family, they distribute their tasks in different roles. Isaac was put in charge of the hut's security, standing guard day and night, ready to defend his allies from any threat. Once he has recovered 100% from the gunshot wound, Edward joins his friend in security and continues to invest in his diary writing project. Over time, the attacks became more and more frequent, and, most nights, the survivors received unexpected visitors. After spending several months in this routine of eliminating zombies at night and burying them in the morning, the day came when the two warriors failed to protect their home and Emma ended up being bitten. Afraid of seeing his sister turn into a zombie, Isaac prepares to shoot her, but discovers that Emma is immune to the pathogen. The young woman reveals that she's been bitten before and never turned, which means that the disease can't get to her. Just then, Eve approaches to take a look at the scar and asks how it happened. According to Emma, before the soldiers arrived, she was looking after her sick neighbor and was bitten. Days passed and the young woman didn't even have a fever. That night, in the early hours of the morning, Edward wakes up from a nightmare and sees Eve leaving the cottage. He immediately gets up and goes after her to ask what happened. Then the healer reveals that, decades ago, she lived with her younger sister. One night, Julia was followed by two drunken men who attacked her and destroyed her life forever. Weeks later, Eve discovered that her sister was pregnant and decided to help her not to have that baby so that she wouldn't have to deal with the fruit of that trauma for the rest of her life. However, when the townspeople found out about this, they accused Julia of terrible things and decided that it was the end for her. The day her sister was eliminated in the public square, Eve was in the audience, but could do nothing to save her. So the woman did what she could and cursed all those people. After that, Eve was banished and treated like a criminal. The healer had only 24 hours to leave the city and walked for several days through the forest alone and hungry, with only the clothes on her body. After a while, Eve met a woman in the forest and was taken in by her. At the time, Melinda lived in the hut and taught her everything she knew about medicinal cures. When Melinda left, Eve found some scrolls containing ancient rituals dating back centuries. One of them is so evil that it can revive the perished. In the hope of bringing her sister back, Eve began to study the rituals and spells. After gaining all that knowledge, the woman went to collect Julia's body from the cemetery and took her to the hut to perform the spell. Hours passed and nothing seemed to have happened. After a while, Eve fell asleep, and when she woke up, she saw her sister standing there, pounding on the door. At that moment, the woman's heart was filled with joy at seeing Julia alive again, but Eve's dream turned into a nightmare when her sister began to claim her first victims. After hearing this story, Edward realizes that he is facing the person responsible for the zombie apocalypse that destroyed humanity and for causing him to lose his family. However, when he sees the pain on the woman's face, Edward realizes that she is deeply sorry and decides not to blame her for what happened, because all Eve wanted was to bring her younger sister back. According to the scrolls, the appearance of hordes of zombies like that have happened at other times in human history and are connected in some way. A few weeks later, Isaac and Edward realize that they are running out of ammunition and decide to break into General Williams's bunker to steal. In the middle of the night, after taking a box from the warehouse, the men sneak out and infiltrate the forest, but their presence is noticed by Cliff and the man decides to follow them. The next morning, Edward decides to continue his mission to reach the waterfall to scatter his son's ashes, as he feels he has put this off for too long. After saying goodbye to his friends, the man goes on his way with the promise that he will return soon. What he doesn't realize is that the trio is in great danger, as Cliff has discovered their location and informs the general that he has found the woman who has immunity to the pathogen. One night, Williams gathers a group of men with battle experience to break into Eve's house and capture everyone inside. His aim is to use Emma as a guinea pig in order to find a cure and eliminate the witch who placed the curse on the land. After a few weeks of walking, Edward finally manages to reach the waterfall his son had dreamed of seeing and scatters Adam's ashes. The man then sets off on a journey home to meet his friends again, but when he arrives at the hut, all he finds is destruction. Seeing Eve injured, Edward rushes to help her and discovers that Isaac and Emma have been taken by the general and his allies. After giving this information, the healer ends up not resisting and Edward prepares to take his revenge. That night, the man paints his face to blend in with the zombies and starts shouting in the middle of the forest to attract their attention. The goal is to lure all those monsters into the bunker so that the zombies can help destroy the enemies. On the way, Edward encounters a guard protecting the entrance to the shelter and shoots him straight in the head. While some monsters stop to feed, the others continue to follow their leader and invade the bunker with the aim of devouring all the humans they meet along the way. Hearing some screams, the general realizes that something is wrong and walks through the corridors wielding a gun to check if his hideout has been invaded. At this point, Williams comes across the horde of zombies and gets busy trying to eliminate them while Edward goes off in search of Emma. When he finds the woman, he shoots Dr. Johnson and helps the young woman to her feet. Before escaping, the pair run to the dungeon to free Isaac and the other prisoners. However, just as they are walking towards the door, Cliff appears and shoots at the fugitives. Just then, the zombies appear and attack the young man, but Isaac is hit by the shot and can no longer get up. In his last words, the man advises Edward to finish off the general's army and asks him to take good care of Emma. When he finally manages to escape from that bunker, Edward asks Emma to hide in the cabin and wait until dawn, because he needs to make sure that his enemies are eliminated once and for all. That night, the man lures Williams and Cliff to the other side of the forest and tries to hide from them, as he knows he is at a disadvantage in this battle. His strategy consists of separating them and luring at least one of them into a trap. While chasing his target, Cliff ends up being taken to a place where he is surrounded by the monsters and soon realizes that he has nowhere to escape. As soon as the young man falls into his trap and gets busy trying to keep the zombies away, Edward goes after the general, but Cliff manages to distract the predators and tries to catch up with his adversary. However, what the young man doesn't know is that he's doing exactly what Edward expected him to do, and, during the chase, Cliff ends up falling into a pit full of zombies. After getting rid of the young man, Edward goes after the general and crosses a stream to hide behind a tree on the other side of the river. When he realizes that his opponent is intent on his mission of revenge, Williams tries to bring him over to his side and claims that the witch has messed with his head. However, it doesn't take long for the general to realize that he won't be able to convince Edward to join him, so he suggests that they both end the duel as gentlemen. After putting their weapons away, the two men came out from behind the trees where they were hiding and headed for the riverbank. While looking into Edward's eyes, the general makes one more attempt to convince him to cooperate and hand over Emma, as the young woman could be the key to the doctors finding a cure. However, Edward stands firm in his position and says that he would rather live in a world dominated by zombies than live among men like Williams. At that moment, the general draws his gun to fire, but Edward is quicker on the trigger and manages to fire the first shot. When his enemy is finished, Edward immediately rushes back to the cabin to look for Emma and is relieved when he makes sure she is all right. Although she is very shaken by the loss of Eve and her brother, the young woman finds solace in Edward's arms and is happy to have someone she can trust around her. After suffering so many losses, Edward comes to the conclusion that a life with a broken heart is not worth living and decides to give himself a new chance. At the end of his diary, the man says that even in a world full of zombies, you can choose to embrace hope and move forward, especially if you have someone worth fighting for. For him, Emma's immunity to the pathogen is proof that a blood descent exists, so there is still hope for humanity. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.